I found the notebook 3 weeks after my father's funeral, tucked behind a stack of old tax returns in his closet. And what I read on the first page made me sit down on the floor of that closet and stay there for almost an hour. I was 41 years old, going through my dad's house in Ohio, doing the quiet, exhausting work that comes after a parent dies. Sorting. Boxing. Deciding what matters and what doesn't. My father, Walter, had been a quiet man. Not cold, just quiet. He worked at the same hardware store for 32 years, came home at 6, ate dinner, watched the news, went to bed. As a kid, I never thought much about him beyond that routine. What I did think about, a lot, was how he raised me. Because my dad had this habit that used to drive me crazy. Whenever I wanted something, he'd tell me not to do it. Not forbid it outright, just gently discourage it, almost like he didn't believe I could pull it off. I remember being 16 and telling him I wanted to try out for the school play. He looked up from his newspaper and said, "That seems like a lot of pressure. Maybe wait till next year." Naturally, I auditioned the next day just to prove him wrong. I got the lead role. When I said I wanted to apply to a college 2 states away, he said, "That's pretty far. You sure you can handle being on your own?" I filled out the application that same night. At the time, I thought my father simply didn't believe in me. I carried that quiet resentment for years, the kind you don't examine too closely because it's easier to just feel it than understand it. I told myself he was overly cautious, maybe even a little threatened by my ambition. I built a whole narrative around it, the dad who doubted his son, and the son who spent his life proving him wrong. That narrative followed me into adulthood. Every big decision I made, starting my own business, marrying my wife Claire after knowing her for only 8 months, moving across the country for a job most people said was too risky, some part of me was still that 16-year-old kid, quietly furious, quietly determined to show him. I didn't realize how much of my life had been shaped by trying to disprove a man who barely raised his voice. The strange part is, my father was never around to see most of it fail or succeed. He didn't call to say congratulations when the business took off. He didn't call to say he told me so when it nearly went under 2 years later. He just existed in the background of my life, steady and unreadable, the same quiet presence he'd always been. I used to think that was distance. I used to think that was a kind of not caring. That's what made the notebook so strange. It wasn't a diary, not really. It was more like a log. Dates, short entries, written in his small, careful handwriting. The first one I opened was from the year I tried out for that play. It read, told him not to do the audition. Said it's too much pressure. He'll do it now for sure. Kids like him need to feel like they're proving something. If I say go for it, he second guesses. If I say don't, he moves mountains. I sat there rereading that sentence maybe 6 times. I flipped further. There was an entry about the college application. He wants to go far away. I'm scared for him, honestly. But if I tell him that, he stays. If I tell him it's too much, he goes and he goes hard. I have to let him think this is his fight, not mine. Page after page, it was the same pattern. Every single time I thought my father doubted me, he had actually been making a calculated decision. He knew, somehow, without ever reading a psychology book in his life, that telling me not to do something made me want it more. He wasn't discouraging me. He was pushing me, just from the opposite direction. I sat on that closet floor and felt something strange happen in my chest, a mix of things I didn't have names for yet. Part of me felt relief, like a 40-year-old wound had just been explained away. But another part of me felt something closer to grief, and it took me a while to understand why. Because if this was true, it meant my father had spent decades absorbing my resentment on purpose. Every time I slammed a door, every time I told Claire that my dad never believed in me, every holiday dinner where I sat a little stiff around him because of some old, unspoken hurt, he knew exactly what he was doing to make me succeed, and he let me be angry at him for it. He never once tried to correct the story. He just let me think what I needed to think, because somewhere along the way, he'd decided my growth mattered more than his own reputation in my eyes. I kept reading. There was an entry from the year I got married. He'd written, didn't say anything about the wedding being fast. Wanted to. But he needs to trust his own judgment, not mine. If it fails, it has to be his lesson, not my failure to warn him. I remember calling Claire that night, reading her parts of it over the phone, my voice breaking in places I didn't expect. She was quiet for a long moment before she said, "So this whole time, you thought he didn't believe in you?" And it was the opposite. "I don't know what it was," I told her. "I don't know if it's better or worse." That's the part that took me weeks to sit with. Because on one hand, it explained so much. On the other hand, it made me realize how much of my own life I had built on a misunderstanding. How many decisions I'd made not out of genuine desire, but out of the need to prove a quiet man wrong. I started wondering which parts of my life were actually mine, and which parts were just reactions to a psychological game I never knew I was playing. I thought about all the dinners where I'd been short with him. All the years I called less than I should have, because some old part of me still felt like he'd never really been in my corner. I thought about the last few months of his life, when he was in and out of the hospital, and how I visited but never really opened up to him, still holding on to that same distance I'd carried since I was a teenager. He never told me the truth. Not once. Even near the end, when there would have been every reason to set the record straight, to finally get the credit, the understanding, the closeness, he stayed quiet. I used to think that meant he didn't care enough to explain himself. Now I think it meant something almost the opposite. He cared more about me believing in myself than about me knowing the truth about him. There's a strange kind of loneliness in realizing someone loved you in a way you couldn't recognize while they were alive. I keep thinking about how many people walk around resenting someone who was actually protecting them, just quietly, just in a way that didn't ask for thanks. I don't think my father was some hidden genius of parenting. I think he was a man who noticed something true about his son early on, that I responded to doubt with defiance, and defiance with drive, and he used that, imperfectly, the best way he knew how. It probably wasn't the healthiest way to raise a kid. I don't know if I'd do it to my own children. But I understand now that it came from somewhere real. It came from a father who didn't know how to say, "I believe in you," out loud, so he said the opposite, and let the results speak for him instead. What stays with me most isn't the trick itself. It's the years of misreading someone I thought I knew completely. It's realizing that the people closest to us are sometimes the hardest to actually see, because we build a version of them early on and stop updating it. I had a whole story about my father, quiet, doubtful, distant, and I never once questioned it, not for 30 years, because it fit so easily into how I already saw myself. I put the notebook back in the closet that day, but I've read it a few more times since. Not to feel sorry for myself, and not really to feel sorry for him either. Just to sit with the discomfort of it. The discomfort of knowing that the story I told myself about someone I loved was wrong the entire time, and that I'll never get the chance to tell him I finally understand. I think about that sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet the way his always was. How many people in our lives are we still misreading right now? How many quiet, ordinary gestures are we mistaking for indifference, simply because we never stop to ask why someone might be showing up in a way we don't recognize as love?